A gripping tale of a daughter who abandons her devoted aging parents in pursuit of her own comfort, only to discover that the same loneliness and emptiness await her in old age. It began with whispers, the kind of whispers that drift through small neighborhoods like smoke from a dying fire. People often spoke of old sacrifices, of parents who had given their all only to be discarded by the very children they raised. Among them, a story simmered, a story of a young woman whose beauty, ambition, and arrogance blinded her to the truth that life is not a straight line. That young woman was named Selina. Her parents, humble farmers, had poured sweat and tears into raising her, sacrificing meals to pay for her schooling, selling heirlooms to buy her books. Yet Selina, ambitious and restless, looked at their wrinkled faces and calloused hands with disdain. She convinced herself that their world was too small, their love too suffocating, and their needs too heavy. Every seed of kindness they planted in her heart was slowly smothered by her growing thirst for independence. She believed she could bloom without roots, that the world would bend to her charm and wit. But no seed grows without soil, and no tree stands forever without its roots. Selina was about to forget that truth. Selina dreamed in colors her parents could not name. She imagined cities of golden light, streets that glittered like diamonds, and doors that opened only for the bold. Every morning she awoke restless. Every evening she despised the silence of the countryside. Her father, Lauren, often sat her down and reminded her, "The city is loud, child, but not every song is sung for you." Her mother, Marella, cooked her favorite meals, hoping warmth would anchor her restless heart. But Selina looked at them not with gratitude but irritation. To her they were weights dragging her down from the skies she was meant to soar across. When an offer finally came, from a wealthy merchant family in the city, willing to help her start a business, Selina saw it as fate calling her name. Her parents begged her to stay, reminding her of their failing health, of the bond that could not be broken. She laughed and said, "You had your life, let me live mine." And so, with a single bag and a heart burning with selfish fire, she turned her back on the only hands that had ever caught her when she fell. The day Selina left, the village was wrapped in silence. Lauren carried her bag to the wagon, his hands trembling not from its weight but from the weight in his chest. Marella clutched her daughter's hand, her eyes searching for one last flicker of love. "Don't go too far," Marella whispered, her voice breaking like brittle glass. Selina pulled her hand away, her face set like stone. "You'll be fine, you have each other." Neighbors watched from doorways, their eyes heavy with judgment. Some muttered that no good would come of abandoning blood. But Selina didn't hear, or rather she refused to. She boarded the wagon, her face turned toward the glitter of the horizon, never once glancing back at the figures shrinking behind her. Her parents stood there long after the dust settled, as if by waiting she might change her mind and run back. But no such miracle came. That night Marella cried herself to sleep while Lauren stared at the roof beams, his heart cracking silently. They had planted their love into her, watered it with sacrifice, and still she had chosen to uproot herself. The city welcomed Selina with open arms, or so it seemed. The noise, the lantern-lit markets, the dazzling people who wore wealth like armor, all of it made her heart race. She was finally free from the chains of dirt fields and endless chores. The merchant family who sponsored her gave her lodging, taught her the language of trade, and pushed her toward opportunities she once only dreamed of. She worked with ferocity, climbing higher each year. She learned to smile with calculated warmth, to flatter, to negotiate. Soon she became known as a clever and ambitious woman who would not be stopped. She rented her own place, draped herself in fine silks, and ate at tables her parents could never have imagined. In her mind, she was finally proving them wrong, showing them that she was not destined for obscurity. But beneath the shimmer of her rise, there was something missing. At night, when laughter faded and her house grew silent, an emptiness crept in. She buried it with more work, more purchases, more parties. Yet in the quiet a voice lingered. "You left them alone." Marella wrote letters every week, her handwriting shaky but her words steady with love. She described the small joys of home, the tomatoes ripening early, the neighbor's cow giving birth, the quiet sunsets they wished Selina could see. Each letter ended the same: "We miss you, please visit." At first Selina opened them, but as her life grew busier and her pride sharper, she tossed them aside unread. "They don't understand," she told herself. "They want to pull me back into their small world." Lauren too sent letters, shorter, simpler, filled with his awkward but heartfelt attempts. "Your mother is not well. The nights are cold. We hope you think of us." These letters too remained unopened. Eventually, the letters stopped coming, but Selina didn't notice. She was too absorbed in her own triumphs, too eager to prove that she needed no one. The truth, however, was that every unopened letter was a thread cut between her and the two people who had stitched her existence together. One by one, the threads frayed, until nothing remained but silence. Time is cruel, and it spares no one. As the years passed, Lauren's once strong arms grew frail, the weight of his work bending his back. Morella, who once sang as she cooked, now coughed through the nights, her body too tired to fight the chill. They often sat by the window staring at the dusty road, hoping a familiar figure might appear. Perhaps tomorrow, Morella would whisper, her voice thin with hope. Lauren rarely answered. His silence spoke louder than any words. The neighbors, once sympathetic, began to shake their heads. "Your daughter has forgotten you," they said. Still, Morella defended her. "She's busy. The city is demanding. She will come when she can." But even as she said it, her heart knew the truth. Their home grew quieter, lonelier, emptier. The laughter that once filled the small house was gone, replaced by the hollow creak of the rocking chair and the echo of unanswered prayers. And still, Selina did not return. Her ambition had built her a palace in the city, while the pillars of her childhood home slowly crumbled. But life, as it always does, was watching, and it was not done with her yet. In the city, Selina's star burned brighter. Her business grew, her name carried weight, and people flocked to her for opportunities. She threw banquets where glasses clinked and laughter roared. From the outside, she looked untouchable, successful, radiant, admired. But beneath her mask of triumph, loneliness lingered like a shadow. She never married, never had children, never let anyone too close. Trust, to her, was weakness. Every time she saw other families dining together, she laughed it off, claiming she had no time for such trivialities. Her mansion echoed with emptiness. The servants she hired bowed respectfully but spoke little. At night, her reflection in the mirror seemed sharper, almost mocking. "You wanted freedom," it seemed to say. "Now you have it." Selina silenced the voice by drowning herself in more work, more deals, more luxury. Yet each new possession only reminded her of what she didn't have. The letters from her parents, those she had buried in drawers, remained unopened relics of a past she pretended didn't exist. The higher she climbed, the more hollow the ground beneath her feet became, and fate was already sharpening its knife. One bitter winter morning, word of Lauren's passing reached Selina. The letter had been sent weeks earlier, but in her arrogance she had left it unopened. By the time she read it, the funeral had already taken place. She sat at her polished oak desk, the words blurring in her vision. "Your father is gone. He asked for you until his last breath." Morella's trembling handwriting filled the page. Selina's chest tightened, but pride fought against sorrow. She whispered to herself, "He lived his life, it was his time." But deep inside, a crack formed, a crack that no gold or success could mend. Days later, another letter arrived. "Your mother is very ill. Please come home before it is too late." Selina held the letter in her hands, her nails digging into the paper. For a fleeting moment she considered going back, but fear held her. Fear of judgment, fear of facing the consequences of her abandonment. She burned the letter in her fireplace, telling herself she had no time for grief. But grief, like smoke, cannot be smothered. It seeps into the walls, into the lungs, into the soul. Morella's health worsened rapidly after Lauren's death. With no daughter by her side, she spent her final days alone, her frail hands clutching the last photograph of her family. Neighbors brought her food, sat with her when they could, but the emptiness of abandonment weighed heavier than any illness. Her last words were whispered to the empty room. "Selina, my child, where are you?" When the news of Morella's death reached Selina, she was at a banquet, raising her glass to yet another victory. The letter sat unopened in her chamber for 3 days before she finally broke the seal. By then, her mother had already been buried in a modest grave next to Lauren. This time Selina wept, but her tears were not just for her mother, they were for herself. She wept for the lost years, for the silence she had chosen, for the love she had thrown away. Yet even in her grief, she could not bring herself to return home. To face the grave of her parents was to face her own selfishness. So she stayed in the city, drowning in luxuries that now felt like chains. The light of her past had vanished, leaving her in a darkness she had crafted herself. Years turned into decades. Selina grew older, her beauty fading like wilted petals. Wrinkles crept across her once proud face, and her hair, once gleaming, turned silver. She remained unmarried, her home empty of children's laughter or companionship. Her business endured. But the world shifted. New merchants rose, younger, hungrier, sharper. Slowly her influence began to wane. Invitations to banquets lessened, admirers drifted away, and those who once bowed now overlooked her. She sat alone in her vast mansion, surrounded by riches that could not speak, silks that could not comfort, and portraits that only reminded her of time lost. The silence that once seemed like peace now screamed in her ears. At night she dreamed of her parents, their voices calling her, their faces full of love and sorrow. She would wake with tears, reaching into the emptiness beside her bed. Her crown of success, once so radiant, was now nothing more than a hollow, rusted piece of metal pressing down on her weary soul. And in the echoes of her empty halls, she finally heard the truth she had ignored all her life. Selfishness does not buy happiness, it only buys silence. The seasons no longer mattered to Selina. Spring blossoms and autumn leaves passed unnoticed beyond her grand windows. Inside, she moved slower each year, her once sharp eyes dulled by fatigue and regret. Servants came and went, most leaving for younger, livelier employers. Soon, only silence remained her companion. Her wealth was untouched, yet it brought no comfort. She could buy gold, jewels, and fine meals, but none of them filled the hollow pit in her chest. The walls of her mansion seemed to whisper, echoing with voices that were no longer there. On some nights she thought she heard Morella calling her name. Other times it was Lauren's gentle laugh in the dark. She would light candles and sit in the flickering glow, whispering apologies to the shadows. But shadows never forgave, and the silence always returned. Each wrinkle on her face was a reminder of time slipping through her fingers. Each gray strand of hair was a thread pulling her closer to the inevitable. And in the quiet, she began to wonder, when I die, who will remember me? Who will cry at my grave? The answer chilled her to the bone, perhaps no one. One evening, Selina attended what would be her last grand banquet. She had been invited more out of courtesy than desire, but she hoped to catch a glimpse of the world that once adored her. The hall sparkled with chandeliers, and laughter filled the air, but Selina felt like a ghost drifting among the living. The younger generation eyed her politely, whispering behind fans and glasses. They spoke of new ventures, of the future, of names she no longer recognized. When she attempted to join their conversations, her words stumbled. They nodded politely, then turned away. To them she was a relic, someone whose time had passed. She sat at the long table, surrounded by chatter and cheer, yet she felt utterly alone. The food turned to ash in her mouth, the wine bitter on her tongue. She realized then that her crown of success had long been stripped away, and all that remained was her aging shell. When the night ended, she returned to her mansion, the echo of laughter still haunting her ears. She locked the door behind her and whispered to herself, "I am a stranger among strangers," and for the first time she admitted she had no one left. Regret is not loud at first. It begins as a whisper, creeping through the cracks of the heart. For Selina it had grown into a roar. She began to revisit the memories she had buried. The sight of her parents at the gate, their hands reaching, their eyes pleading, the letters she had burned. Every detail returned sharper than before. She saw Lauren's trembling hands carrying her bag, Morella's tearful smile as she begged her not to go. She remembered the unopened letters, the ignored cries, the silence she had chosen. At night she spoke aloud to the emptiness. "I was wrong, I was foolish. Please forgive me." But forgiveness does not come to the unrepentant late in life. It comes when it is sought early, when those who could give it still breathe. She realized that even if she fell to her knees and begged, her parents would never hear her. Their graves were silent, their voices long gone. And so her regret became a chain, one she dragged behind her every waking moment, a weight heavier than any crown she had once worn. Loneliness gnawed at Selina. She began inviting distant relatives and old acquaintances to her mansion, desperate for company. They came politely, but she quickly realized their visits were not for her. They were for her wealth. They flattered her, asked about her health, but their eyes always wandered to the treasures in her home. When she hinted at her regrets, they grew restless, uninterested in the burdens of her soul. Some whispered behind her back that she was bitter, that her riches would soon pass into the hands of others. Once she overheard a guest say, "She has everything, yet nothing. When she dies, all this will be scattered." The words cut her deeper than any knife. Slowly, the visits dwindled. People lost patience with her sorrow, leaving her to her solitude. The mansion grew quieter with each passing month, its vast halls echoing with the emptiness of a life that had chased wealth but lost love. Selina began to dread the silence, yet it was all she had left. No one came to comfort her, no one came to listen. The only visitors were shadows of memories she could not erase. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Selina stood before her mirror. She barely recognized the face staring back at her. The proud, ambitious girl was gone, replaced by an old woman with tired eyes and trembling hands. She touched the glass, as if trying to reach the version of herself that once believed she could conquer the world. "What have I done?" she whispered. The mirror, cold and silent, reflected her question back without mercy. For the first time she allowed herself to imagine a different life. A life where she had stayed, cared for her parents, and built happiness in simplicity. She saw herself laughing with them at the table, sharing stories, holding their hands in their final days. Tears blurred her vision, dripping onto her silk gown. But the images faded, leaving only the old woman in the mirror. And Selina realized that her punishment was not death, it was life. A life lived long enough to understand the cost of her selfishness. The mirror did not forgive her. It only reminded her that she was alone and that she had made herself this way. Winter returned, harsher than before. Selina's mansion, once warm with roaring fires and bustling servants, now lay cold and hollow. She had dismissed most of her help, unable to bear their pitying looks or greedy eyes. The halls groaned under the weight of silence, each corner holding echoes of laughter that never existed. She wandered the rooms with a lantern, her shadow stretching long and thin, a ghost moving through her own life. She stopped often at the portraits on the wall, her younger self smiling confidently, adorned in jewels. Those eyes looked mocking now, as if laughing at the ruin she had become. At night the loneliness pressed hardest. The ticking of the clock became unbearable, each sound reminding her of time slipping away. She would sit by the fire, clutching the letters she had once ignored, tracing the handwriting of her parents with trembling fingers. "I should have come back," she whispered to the walls. But the walls did not answer. They never would. The house, vast and empty, became her prison. Every luxury around her felt like chains, every silence a punishment. For Selina, the mansion she had once dreamed of was now nothing more than a tomb waiting to close. Selina's body began to betray her. Her legs ached, her hands shook, her breaths came shorter. Doctors visited, prescribing medicines, but none could cure the weight pressing down on her chest, the weight of a lifetime of regret. She stopped attending gatherings, stopped answering letters. Those who once pretended to care about her wealth now ignored her entirely. The world moved on, forgetting her name, her influence, her presence. She had built her empire on ambition. But empires crumble when there are no heirs to carry them forward. She sat by her window, staring at the street below. Children laughed and played, families walked arm in arm. Neighbors greeted one another warmly. She watched it all through glass, separated by the choices she had made long ago. Each day blended into the next, a blur of silence and shadows. Sometimes she whispered to her parents as though they were listening, "If only I could see you one more time, if only I could say I'm sorry." But wishes are powerless against time, and Selina knew her days were dwindling. The life she had stolen from her parents, the love she had denied, was now circling back to collect its debt. On her final night, the storm outside mirrored the chaos in Selina's heart. Thunder rattled the windows, lightning lit the empty halls, and rain drummed against the roof like a funeral song. She lay in her bed, her breathing shallow, the weight of years pressing down on her fragile body. Her eyes roamed the darkened ceiling, but her mind wandered elsewhere, to the past. She saw Morella's gentle smile, Lauren's firm yet kind gaze, the home she had abandoned. She heard their voices, faint but unmistakable, calling her name. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry, forgive me." For the first time in years her heart softened. Stripped of pride and pretense, she realized that all the wealth, all the victories, all the grand banquets had been nothing more than illusions. What truly mattered had been left behind in that small home long ago. As the storm raged on, Selina's eyes closed, her final breath escaped with one word, "Mother." And then there was silence. The mansion, cold and vast, welcomed its mistress into eternal solitude. Selina was buried in the city's cemetery, her grave marked with a fine stone purchased from her own wealth. Yet no mourners gathered, no family stood weeping, no voices prayed for her soul. Only the undertaker and a priest attended, performing their duties quickly before moving on. Her mansion, left without an heir, was sold piece by piece. Strangers picked through her belongings, taking silks, jewels, and furniture. The once great home became just another property stripped of its history, its memories, its sorrow. In contrast, her parents' graves, though simple and unadorned, were often visited by neighbors who remembered their kindness. Flowers were laid there, prayers whispered, stories told. The world soon forgot Selina's name. Her legacy, built on selfishness and ambition, crumbled into dust. The life she had chosen, loneliness and regret, became her final inheritance. And in the end, her grave stood as a warning. Wealth without love is nothing, ambition without loyalty is hollow, and selfishness always leads to emptiness. Her story, though silenced by time, lingered like a whisper in the wind, cautioning those who dared to repeat her mistakes. Years after her passing, villagers still told the story of Selina, though her name was often changed in the retelling. Mothers warned their children, "Do not abandon those who gave you life, for time has a way of punishing the ungrateful." Fathers shook their heads and reminded their sons, "Success without love is an empty victory." The tale spread, carried from one town to another, reshaped but never forgotten. And though Selina's grave lay cold and unattended, her story lived on, not as inspiration but as a caution. Children who heard it would glance at their parents with new eyes, realizing the fragility of love and the weight of gratitude. Those who dreamed of riches learned that gold cannot embrace you in your final days, nor can jewels whisper comfort when regret claws at your heart. Selena had lived for herself, and in the end she had died by herself. Her life became an echo, a reminder that selfishness breeds only silence, and abandonment reaps only sorrow. And so her story ends with a single haunting truth: honor those who love you before it is too late. If you were moved by this tale, subscribe for more stories that stir the soul and remind us of the lessons life never stops teaching.